How to get away with saving the galaxy. Standing before the Galactic High Council's chamber doors, Commander Jack Lucky Sterling took a moment to straighten his regulation Terran Space Force uniform. Not because it needed straightening. He'd perfected the art of looking just disheveled enough to annoy bureaucrats, but because he knew it would add the perfect touch of dramatic timing to his entrance. "Commander Sterling," wheezed his assigned defense attorney, a gelatinous purple blob imaginatively named Bob, "perhaps we should review your defense strategy one more time." Sterling gave his best winning smile, the one that had gotten him out of 3 intergalactic incidents and into at least twice as many. "Don't worry, Bob. I've got this completely under control." Bob's surface rippled with anxiety, sending tiny purple waves across what Sterling assumed was their face. "That's exactly what worries me, Commander. The last time a human said they had things under control, an entire sector developed an addiction to something called reality television." "Well, that's actually quite funny you should mention that," Sterling began, but was cut off by the massive doors swinging open with an unnecessarily dramatic whoosh. Someone in the council really had a thing for theatrics. The council chamber itself was exactly what you'd expect if Space IKEA had a baby with Space Baroque, and then hired Space Liberace as the interior decorator. Every surface gleamed with an almost aggressive shininess, and the 7 council members sat upon what could only be described as thrones that had gone through puberty and were trying too hard to impress the other furniture. Grand Arbiter Plixplex, head of the council and owner of the galaxy's most impressive collection of ceremonial robes, self-proclaimed, peered down at Sterling through all 4 of their eyes. "Commander Jack Sterling of Earth, you stand accused of multiple violations of galactic law, cultural contamination, and, most seriously, making the Galactic Council look, as you humans would say, completely clueless." "That's not entirely accurate, Your Grandness," Sterling replied, maintaining perfect parade rest posture. "Oh?" Plixplex's top set of eyebrows rose while the bottom set furrowed, creating an expression that reminded Sterling of a confused owl trying to do calculus. "You left out dashingly handsome from my list of titles." Bob made a sound like a wet sponge having an existential crisis. Council member Zix, the Z's were silent, all of them, fluttered their crystalline wings in agitation. "This is precisely the kind of flippant attitude that has caused so much chaos in our ordered galaxy. You humans simply don't take anything seriously enough." "On the contrary," Sterling said, allowing just a hint of a smile to play across his face, "we take everything exactly as seriously as it deserves to be taken. For instance, right now I'm taking this proceeding exactly as seriously as I would take a rubber chicken in a tuxedo trying to teach quantum physics." The council chambers erupted in a cacophony of outraged squeaks, clicks, and what sounded suspiciously like a kazoo having a temper tantrum. Bob's entire form had gone a pale lavender of mortification. "Silence!" Plixplex thundered, their voice echoing off the chamber's unnecessarily high ceiling. "Commander Sterling, you will explain your actions, starting with the Zezex Thor mining colony incident. And please, for the love of all that's bureaucratically sacred, try to stick to the facts." Sterling's smile widened just a fraction. "Oh, certainly. The facts. Well, it all started when we accidentally stumbled upon their totally legitimate mining operation. Would you believe we were actually lost? Our nav system had a bizarre malfunction, something about a cat video overloading the entertainment subroutines." Bob's colour shifted to something between anxiety purple and oh no indigo, as Sterling launched into his explanation. This was going to be either the most brilliant defense in galactic history, or the fastest way to start an interstellar incident since humans introduced the concept of casual Fridays to the rigid conformity collective of Betelgeuse. Probably both. "So there we were," Sterling continued, gesturing casually as if he were recounting a minor fender bender rather than an interplanetary incident, completely lost due to that unfortunate cat video situation. "Did you know cats wearing pajamas can crash even quantum computers? Fascinating creatures, really." "Commander," Plixplex's voice carried the weariness of someone who'd heard far too many human explanations. "The mining colony? Right. So we detected this mining colony that, according to our outdated star charts, definitely wasn't supposed to be there. Being the helpful humans we are, we thought we should stop by and offer assistance, in case they were lost too. Happens to the best of us. Council member Thraxix, whose species communicated partially through changing skin patterns, turned a particularly skeptical shade of chartreuse. Your logs indicate you arrived in a heavily armed patrol cruiser. Ah, well, of course, space is dangerous. There could be pirates or door-to-door salesmen, or worst of all, people trying to reach us about our ship's extended warranty. Bob the Blob had begun stress morphing, their surface rippling like a purple pond in a hurricane. Commander, perhaps we should focus on the, actual events. The actual events, Council member Zix chimed in, where you and your crew systematically dismantled the entire operation within 3 standard days? Sterling's expression turned thoughtful. Dismantled is such a harsh word. We prefer facilitated a rapid reorganization of workplace dynamics. And really, we barely did anything. We just happened to mention a few Earth concepts to the workers, little things, lunch breaks, workplace safety, the weekend, unions. The council chamber erupted in horrified gasps. One of the junior members actually fainted, their crystalline form tinkling melodically as their assistants rushed to catch them. Unions? Plix-plex thundered, all 4 eyes widening in shock. You introduced an enslaved workforce to the concept of collective bargaining. Oh, is that what that was? Sterling's innocent expression could have won awards. We just showed them some old Earth documentaries during their newly implemented break time. Norma Ray, October Sky, a few episodes of The Office, purely for entertainment purposes, you understand. How are we supposed to know they'd find the idea of organizing so appealing? The mining operation shut down within a week. Thraxix's skin was now cycling through various shades of apoplectic purple, inadvertently matching Bob's stress coloring. Did it? Shutdown is such a final term. I prefer to think of it as an aggressive restructuring. The workers now own and operate the facility as a cooperative. Production is up 300%. Workplace accidents are down 98%, and they've instituted a truly revolutionary profit-sharing program. Sterling paused thoughtfully. They also started a softball league, though I admit that might have been taking things a bit far. Bob had somehow managed to pull themselves together enough to interject. If I may, esteemed counsel, while my client's actions might seem unorthodox, the mining operation was, in fact, operating in violation of at least 15 galactic labor laws. 16, Sterling corrected helpfully. They also didn't have proper recycling bins. But who's counting? The point, Bob continued, their purple surface now showing traces of what might have been confidence, is that the eventual outcome actually brought the operation into compliance with galactic law, while simultaneously increasing productivity and worker satisfaction. And Sterling added, they named their first union hall after me, the Sterling Silver Solidarity Center. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Plix-plex's head tendrils had tied themselves into what appeared to be a stress knot. This is exactly the problem with you humans. You stumble into situations with no regard for proper procedures, throw everything into chaos and somehow, succeed beyond all reasonable expectations, Sterling offered. Make things better through utterly inappropriate methods. Plix-plex finished with a splutter. To be fair, Sterling said, examining his perfectly regulation-length fingernails, we did file all the proper paperwork, retroactively, of course, and in triplicate. We know how much the Council loves its paperwork. Retroactive paperwork is not proper paperwork. Zix's wings were now vibrating at a frequency that threatened to shatter nearby decorative crystals. Really? The processing department didn't seem to mind, though that might have had something to do with the coffee and donut delivery service the mining cooperative set up for them. Did you know that bureaucrats across the galaxy share a universal love for sprinkles? Another fascinating cross-species similarity. Bob, who had been quietly rippling with what might have been suppressed laughter, quickly composed themselves. Perhaps we should move on to the next item on the agenda. The Yip-Yap cultural contamination incident? Sterling's eyes lit up. Oh, now that's a fun story. Did you know that before we introduced them to reality TV, the Yip-Yaps had never even heard of drama queens? Talk about cultural deprivation. Plix quickly raised all four hands. We will take a brief recess before discussing that particular incident. This council needs time to process the mining colony situation, and possibly some antacids. As the council members filed out, each looking more disturbed than the last, Sterling turned to Bob with a wink. See? Told you I had this under control. Bob's surface rippled with what might have been a sigh. Commander, has anyone ever told you that your definition of control is somewhat unconventional? Only every superior officer I've ever had, Sterling replied cheerfully. They usually say it right before giving me another commendation they can't quite explain. After the council members had taken sufficient time to recover their composure and consume what Sterling strongly suspected were extra-strength alien antacids, the session resumed. The chamber's lighting had been dimmed slightly, presumably to help with Plix's stress-induced headache. Now then, Plix began, their voice carrying the forced calm of someone who'd just done several deep breathing exercises. Let us discuss the Yip-Yap incident. Ah yes, Sterling brightened, one of my personal favourites. You introduced an entire species to what you call reality television, in direct violation of Cultural Protection Directive 47B. Council member Thraxix's skin had taken on the colour of outraged mustard. Actually, Sterling raised a finger, if you check subsection 12 of that directive, you'll find there's no specific mention of reality TV. Probably because no one in the galaxy had imagined such a thing was possible, which, when you think about it, is exactly why the Yip-Yaps needed it. Bob, who had spent the recess practicing their most professional rippling pattern, interjected. Perhaps, Commander, you should explain exactly how this cultural exchange occurred. Of course. Well, it all started when our ship's entertainment officer, lovely woman makes a mean martini, accidentally broadcast a Real Housewives of Mars marathon to their primary communication network. Accidentally? All 7 council members asked in unison. Complete accident. She was trying to stream it to the ship's rec room but hit the wrong button. You know how confusing these modern entertainment systems can be. Anyway, by the time we realized what had happened, the Yip-Yaps had already binged 3 seasons and developed strong opinions about who should have been voted off the Olympus Mons compound. Plix's head tendrils had begun to twist themselves into another anxiety knot. And you didn't think to stop the transmission? Well, we were going to, but then something fascinating happened. The Yip-Yaps, who had previously been known throughout the galaxy as, let's be honest, rather dull conversationalists, suddenly developed an incredible talent for drama management and conflict resolution. They were perfectly fine conversationalists, Zix protested. They always agreed with everything. Exactly, Sterling nodded sagely. Boring. But after exposure to the subtle intricacies of reality TV drama, they learned to express opinions. Disagree, negotiate. They started phrases with, I'm not here to make friends, but, and in my honest opinion, it was beautiful to watch. They became argumentative. Thraxix's skin was now cycling through various shades of distress. They became assertive, Sterling corrected. There's a difference. And more importantly, they became the galaxy's best negotiators. Who do you think brokered that peace treaty between the Silicon Hive and the Carbon Collective last month? A uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber as the council members shifted in their ornate seats. That's right, Sterling continued, clearly enjoying himself. A team of Yip-Yap negotiators. They solved a 1,000-year conflict by introducing both sides to the concept of a drama-free zone and teaching them to spill the tea in a constructive manner. Bob had begun to develop what appeared to be a pattern of amused bubbles across their surface. The statistical data does show a 400% increase in successful diplomatic resolutions since the Yip-Yaps began their new consulting service. They've even started their own reality show, Sterling added helpfully. Galactic Peace Warriors. It's quite popular. I hear even some council members watch it." He glanced meaningfully at Council Member Kavork, who quickly tried to hide what looked suspiciously like a fan t-shirt under their ceremonial robes. This is beside the point," Plixplex sputtered. "You cannot simply introduce potentially damaging Earth concepts to other species." "Damaging?" Sterling raised an eyebrow. "The Yip Yaps now have the highest satisfaction rating in civil service roles across the galaxy. They've revolutionized conflict resolution techniques. They've even improved council meetings, or so I hear." That's, Plixplex deflated slightly. "That's actually true. The new Yip Yap protocol officer has made our sessions much more efficient, and their suggestion to add a Drama Llama timeout corner has significantly reduced meeting tensions. See, all's well that ends in higher efficiency ratings." Sterling beamed. "Though I do feel I should mention purely as an aside that the Yip Yaps have recently discovered soap operas." The collective groan from the council was interrupted by Bob quickly clearing their throat, or whatever passed for a throat in their gelatinous form. "Perhaps we should move on to the next item, the, caffeine crisis of Sector 7? Sterling's eyes gleamed with barely suppressed delight. "Oh, yes, the great coffee conversion. You know, it's amazing what can happen when you introduce a warrior race to the concept of a morning brew." Plixplex quickly raised all four hands again. "Another recess, immediately, and someone please check if we have any stronger antacids in the medical bay." As the council members hurried out, Bob turned to Sterling with what might have been a smirk rippling across their surface. "Commander, I'm beginning to suspect these accidents of yours aren't entirely accidental." "Bob," Sterling replied with a wink, "I have absolutely no idea what you mean. Though I should mention, I brought some excellent cold brew coffee if you'd like to try it. Purely for research purposes, of course." "Of course," Bob agreed, their purple surface shimmering with what was definitely suppressed laughter now. "Purely for research." When the council reconvened, several members were clutching what appeared to be stress squeeze toys designed for their various anatomical appendages. Plixplex had apparently discovered that their ceremonial robes could be repurposed as a comfort blanket. "Now then," Plixplex began, hugging their robe tighter, "the caffeine crisis of Sector 7, specifically your role in introducing the Krthak warrior clans to coffee." "Our coffee," Sterling's face lit up. "Nature's perfect beverage. Did you know the Krthak had been waging constant war for 10,000 years before their first cappuccino?" "The Krthak were proud warriors," Council Member Zizix protested, their crystalline wings vibrating with indignation. "They lived for battle, bred for combat, breathed for—" "Were really cranky before their morning coffee," Sterling suggested helpfully. "I mean, that explains all the fighting, doesn't it? They were just collectively under-caffeinated." Bob, who had notably developed a slightly darker purple spot that looked suspiciously like a coffee stain, interjected. "Perhaps we should discuss the actual sequence of events?" "Of course. Well, it all started when our ship needed emergency repairs in Krthak space. Completely routine breakdown. Nothing to do with our engineers' experimental coffee-powered warp drive modifications." "Coffee-powered?" Plixplex's voice faded into a weak squeak. "Oh, that part actually worked great. The problem was our engineer got so excited about the success that she forgot to watch her regular coffee consumption. Did you know humans on a caffeine high can accidentally calibrate quantum engines to run on espresso? Fascinating stuff." Thraxix, whose skin had taken on the distinct pattern of someone developing a migraine, leaned forward. "And this led to you establishing 15,000 Starbucks locations across Krthak space? How exactly?" "Well, we needed coffee for the repairs, obviously, and we happened to have some extra beans on board. And our barista, yes, all human ships carry baristas, they're essential personnel, offered to make some for the Krthak repair crew." Sterling shrugged. "How were we supposed to know they'd be so susceptible to the powers of a well-made flat white? The Krthak warrior clans abandoned their ancient blood feuds for... Council Member Kavork seemed unable to finish the sentence. "Loyalty points programs," Sterling nodded solemnly. "Turns out they're extremely competitive about collecting stars on their rewards apps. Did you know they once had a 3-day ceremony to honor the first warrior to reach gold card status?" Beautiful event. I cried a little. Their entire economy restructured around coffee cultivation. Plixplex's head tendrils were now stress-knitting themselves into what appeared to be a small sweater. And they're doing brilliant work. Krthak Dark Roast is now the most sought-after coffee in 3 galaxies. They've turned their war academies into barista schools. Their battle cries have been repurposed into coffee orders. It's really quite impressive how they've maintained their warrior spirit. They just channel it into perfecting their latte art now. Bob rippled thoughtfully. The statistics do show a 99.9% reduction in interstellar conflicts involving Krthak space since the introduction of coffee culture. The remaining 0.1% is just the occasional disagreement over whether non-dairy milk alternatives count as authentic Krthak coffee additions, Sterling added. Though I have to say, watching a Krthak battle barista defend their oat milk chai latte recipe in ritual combat is quite something. But... Zix fluttered in distress. They've replaced their traditional war paintings with coffee-themed tattoos? Sterling grinned. The one of a coffee bean riding a space dragon is particularly popular, very tasteful. And now, Plixplex said weakly, they're demanding to open a coffee shop, here, in the council chambers. Oh good, they approved that? The lines at the current council cafe are terrible. And between us, Sterling leaned forward conspiratorially, your current coffee tastes like it was filtered through a used ion drive. Several council members shifted guiltily in their seats, a few even nodding in agreement before catching themselves. Besides, Sterling continued, think of it as cultural exchange. The Krthak get to maintain their warrior tradition through competitive barista championships. The galaxy gets amazing coffee. And everyone's too busy enjoying their morning brew to start any wars. Win-win-win, wouldn't you say? That's not how cultural exchange is supposed to work, Plixplex protested, though their upper set of eyes kept darting hopefully toward the plans for the new coffee shop. No? Then how do you explain the fact that the Krthak have voluntarily signed 17 peace treaties, all negotiated over their famous Peace and Prosperity pumpkin spice blend, which, by the way, is excellent. I brought samples for everyone. The chamber erupted into chaos as various council members tried to simultaneously express outrage and edge closer to the samples Sterling was now casually unpacking. Perhaps, Bob suggested, their surface rippling with barely contained amusement, we should take another brief recess to process this information, possibly over a cup of Krthak's newest diplomatic blend. Excellent idea, Bob, and while we're at it, I can tell you about our next little adventure. Ever wonder what happened when we introduced democracy to the Hive Mind Collective? Now that's a story best told over coffee. The sound of Plixplex fainting dead away into their comfort robes was nearly drowned out by the eager murmur of council members suddenly very interested in trying these coffee samples. After all, they reasoned, it would be diplomatically irresponsible not to understand such an important part of Krthak's new culture. Sterling just smiled and began brewing the coffee with the practiced ease of someone who knew exactly how this whole thing would play out from the start. After a surprisingly lengthy coffee break, during which 3 council members had to be gently discouraged from applying for Krthak barista training programs, the session resumed. Plixplex had recovered consciousness but was now clutching both their comfort robe and a large cup of Krthak's diplomatic dark roast. We will now address, Plixplex announced, taking a fortifying sip of coffee, what the council considers your most egregious action to date, the introduction of... They shuddered visibly. Individual thinking to the Hive Mind Collective. Oh, that, Sterling brightened. You know, it's interesting you should bring that up right after our coffee discussion. Did you know the collective had never experienced a difference of opinion before humans introduced them to the concept of beverage preferences? They were a hive mind. Thraxix's skin had taken on the color of pure exasperation. They weren't supposed to have different opinions. Well, that just seems limiting. I mean, imagine never having a friendly debate about whether tea or coffee is superior, or never experiencing the joy of winning an argument because you've actually changed someone's mind rather than just assimilated it. Bob, who had been quietly enjoying their third cup of sample coffee, rippled thoughtfully. Commander, Perhaps you should explain exactly how this democratization occurred? Of course, it all started when we were invited to give a presentation about Earth culture to the collective. Standard diplomatic stuff. But there was this tiny mix-up with our cultural database. Tiny mix-up. Plixplex's voice carried the weight of someone who knew they were about to need more antacids. Well, instead of the approved cultural exchange materials, we accidentally played the entire run of Parks and Recreation, followed by a marathon of British Parliament debates. Pure clerical error. Could have happened to anyone. The collective groan from the council suggested they were beginning to see a pattern with Sterling's accidents. The Hive Mind Collective spent the next 3 days processing the concept of Leslie Knope versus Ron Swanson's governmental philosophies. Zix's wings were now vibrating at caffeine-enhanced speeds. They had never experienced internal disagreement before. Fascinating process to watch, really, Sterling nodded. First, they discovered they could have different opinions about the show. Then they realized they could have different opinions about everything. Next thing you know, they're holding their first election for Hive representative. The campaign slogans were amazing. Make the collective individual again was particularly catchy. You fractured a united consciousness that had existed for 10,000 years, Kevork declared, though they appeared to be taking notes about the campaign slogan. Fractured? No, we expanded it. Now instead of one consciousness sharing 1 million bodies, they have 1 million consciousness sharing one goal, building a better society through robust democratic debate and occasional filibusters. They've demanded representation on the council, Plixplex said weakly. Well, of course they have, and they're sending 5 representatives, each with different political viewpoints. Very progressive of them, don't you think? I particularly like their new political parties, the progressives, the conservatives, the moderates, the free thinkers, and, my personal favourite, the Parks and Recreation Fan Club Party. Bob's surface had begun displaying what appeared to be suppressed laughter patterns. The productivity and innovation ratings for collective space have increased by 500% since the introduction of democratic processes. And their meme game has gotten so much better, Sterling added. Have you seen their political cartoons? Hilarious stuff. Really captures the spirit of democratic discourse. But Plixplex was now stress-knitting with their head tendrils again. This completely disrupts the balance of power in the galaxy. Does it? Sterling's expression turned thoughtful. Or does it create a more stable galaxy, where every voice, even the ones that used to be part of a hive mind, gets a chance to be heard, where ancient warrior races can channel their competitive spirit into making the perfect latte, where formerly exploited workers can organize for better conditions, where species that never expressed an opinion before can become master negotiators. A heavy silence fell over the chamber as the council members exchanged uncomfortable glances. In fact, Sterling continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone for the first time, one might almost think that all of these accidents were actually helping to create a more balanced, more equitable, and more stable galactic society. Hypothetically speaking, of course. Bob's colour had shifted to something that might have been admiration. Hypothetically speaking, one might even suggest that these changes have made the galaxy more resilient, more capable of facing future challenges. Almost, Sterling smiled, as if someone had planned it that way. The council chamber erupted into shocked whispers as the implications began to sink in. You, Plixplex sputtered, nearly dropping their coffee. You did all this on purpose. I admit nothing, Sterling said cheerfully. I'm just a simple Earth commander who keeps having remarkable accidents that somehow make the galaxy a better place. Would anyone like more coffee while we discuss my punishment? About that punishment, Bob interjected, their surface now showing distinct patterns of smugness. I believe I'm ready to present my final defense, unless the council has already reached a decision. Plixplex looked around at their fellow council members who were variously sipping Krthak coffee, checking their yip-yap negotiation apps, and reading the latest polling data from the Hive Mind Collective. Plixplex's head tendrils untangled in defeat. "I believe we should proceed with your defense, Bob." Sterling sat back with a satisfied smile, already knowing exactly how this would end. After all, he hadn't come this far by accident. Well, not entirely by accident anyway. Bob's surface rippled with newfound confidence as they moved to address the council. Their purple form had taken on an almost professional sheen, though the coffee stain remained visible, now looking suspiciously like a power tie. "Esteemed council members," Bob began, "I stand before you today to defend Commander Sterling's actions, though perhaps defend isn't quite the right word. Celebrate might be more appropriate." Sterling lounged in his chair, the very picture of innocent attention, though the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. "The prosecution has presented a list of charges," Bob continued, their voice taking on a resonant wobble. "Cultural contamination, procedural violations, unauthorized introduction of coffee and reality TV to unsuspecting species, and most seriously," they paused for dramatic effect, "making the council look clueless." "Which we are not," Plixplex declared, then immediately took a stress sip of their fourth Krthak espresso. "Of course not. In fact, I would argue that the council has demonstrated remarkable wisdom throughout these events." This got everyone's attention. Even Sterling raised an eyebrow, though his expression suggested he knew exactly where this was going. "Consider," Bob's surface rippled dramatically, "that despite numerous opportunities to stop these accidents, the council consistently allowed them to play out. Almost as if, subconsciously, you recognized that these changes were necessary." Zix's wings stopped mid-flutter. What? Think about it. The galaxy was stagnating, worker exploitation, endless wars, rigid hierarchies, and a distinct lack of quality coffee. Something had to change. But such change couldn't come from within the system. It needed an outside catalyst, an agent of controlled chaos, if you will. Sterling examined his fingernails modestly. Commander Sterling didn't just create chaos. He created precisely the right kind of chaos. Each accident addressed a critical flaw in our galactic society, and more importantly, Bob's voice took on a sly tone. He did it in ways that gave the council perfect deniability. Plixplex's head tendrils froze mid-knit. Deniability. Exactly. You can tell your more conservative members that these changes were accidental, while privately taking credit for overseeing a great galactic transformation. In fact, one might say Commander Sterling has made the council look more competent than ever. The chamber filled with thoughtful murmurs as council members began nodding slowly. After all, Bob continued, really getting into their stride now, who else could have successfully managed such a complex series of social reforms without causing a single major conflict? "Under your wise oversight, of course," they added with a diplomatic ripple. Sterling watched with undisguised admiration as his defense attorney expertly manipulated the council's perspective, turning his crimes into achievements they could claim partial credit for. "Furthermore," Bob declared, "I move that, rather than punishment, Commander Sterling's unique talents should be officially recognized and utilized." "What exactly are you suggesting?" Thraxix asked, their skin showing a pattern of cautious interest. "Make him an official diplomatic advisor to the council. That way his future accidents will be under your direct supervision. Think of it as keeping your friends close and your agents of chaos closer." Sterling finally spoke up. "I would, of course, submit detailed reports after each diplomatic mission. Eventually, once the paperwork finds its way through the system, you know how these things go. And," Bob added with a flourish, "he could help implement that new coffee shop in the council chambers. I hear the Krthak are very particular about who they trust with their franchise licenses." The council members huddled together, whispered frantically for several minutes, and finally turned back to face Sterling and Bob. Plixplex cleared their throat, adjusted their comfort robe, and spoke with all the dignity they could muster. "After careful consideration, the council has decided that Commander Sterling's actions, while unorthodox, have ultimately benefited galactic society. We hereby appoint him as special diplomatic advisor for..." Innovative social development and caffeine relations, Sterling suggested helpfully. Yes, that, Plixplex sighed. May the galaxy survive. As the council members filed out, already arguing about who would get the first coffee shop loyalty card, Bob turned to Sterling. You planned this whole thing from the start, didn't you? Even choosing me as your defense attorney? Bob, my gelatinous friend, let's just say I've learned that sometimes the best person to defend controlled chaos is someone who can go with the flow. Sterling winked. Coffee? Please, Bob rippled with amusement. I believe we should discuss your next accidental diplomatic mission. I hear the Silicon Synchronicity is having trouble with their rigid binary thinking. Funny you should mention that, Sterling grinned, pulling out his datapad. I just happened to download the entire run of Star Trek, The Next Generation. Data's journey to understand humanity could be very educational. Bob's surface shimmered with what might have been an eye roll if they had eyes. The galaxy's not going to know what hit it, is it? Of course not, Sterling replied, already planning his next brilliant disaster. That's half the fun. And somewhere in the council chambers, Plixplex felt a sudden inexplicable shiver run down their tendrils, as if the galaxy itself was gleefully anticipating whatever wonderful chaos would come next. After all, the best kind of revolution is the one where everyone's too busy enjoying their coffee and reality TV to notice it's happening.